What I want to do now is I want to walk through a little bit about how to use the T accounts to go through and to answer some of the questions that you might see on quizzes or homework problems to solve how to find numbers as they are shown in the flow of cost through an organization. Now you don't have to use T accounts. You can just kind of remember, you can use how the calculations or the formulas work for calculating different things like ending inventories or cost of goods manufactured or cost of goods sold. Or you can remember the format of the cost of goods manufactured and use that and walk through that in your mind to put the numbers in the right place. But I find T accounts to be an easy way for me to keep this in mind because they illustrate the flow of the costs from the raw materials inventory when the raw materials come in, and then work in process where the materials get moved into process, and then the labor and the overhead gets added, and then when those are finished, they get moved to finished goods until they're ready to go, and then when they're sold, they go to cost of goods sold. So for me, the T accounts is a handy way to organize all of this words that come up because these words look to me like it's like accounting is a really big word problem. And people get confused because all the numbers are floating around, they don't know how to organize them. Or another way of thinking of it, think of this as a puzzle. And you know when you open up a puzzle and you dump all the pieces out there just a jumble, and you start organizing them, right? You start putting all the corners in one place and all the straight edges in another place and all the different colors, the blues and the reds, the predominant colors, in different piles. Then you start looking for the pieces that are how to go together, and then once you find some that are together, you look for the pieces that are missing. Well, the T accounts for me are the way that I go through and organize the puzzle pieces for the word problems. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the T accounts, all a T account is, think of it as the ledgers, the general ledgers that you saw in 201, where the left side is the debit and the right side is the credit. So these actually represent a visualization of journal entries. And so when we do an entry to the left, these are all asset accounts for the three inventories, and then cost of goods sold is an expense. So when we do an entry on the left, we're increasing the inventory because we're debiting an asset. And when we do an entry on the right, we're decreasing an asset because we're crediting an asset. Okay? Same way on cost of goods sold, we're going to put it on the left. You'll have to debit it in order to show that it went up. So with that in mind, let's walk through some of the examples of some problems you might see or similar problems on quizzes and exams. So in this one it talks about you have a company, Standstill Industries has $2,500 of raw materials inventory. At the beginning of 2017 there were $2,000 of materials on hand. During the year the company purchased $375,000 of materials, however it only paid for $312,500. How much inventory was requisitioned for use on jobs during 2017? Again, it's like a word problem. All you need is a train leaving Chicago, heading towards New York, and you'd have a classic word problem. So go through and take the pieces that are up there and start to put them into place. So one thing you want to keep in mind is, what am I looking for? How much inventory was requisitioned for use on jobs during 2017? What I'm saying there is, how much inventory was moved into work in process? Because it comes into a job, it's requisition. So I'm looking for the number here that's going to be increased by debiting work in process inventory, or what's going to be credited because it's going to be moved out of raw materials. So start going through and filling in the pieces that you know. So the first thing I know is I have $2,500 of raw materials inventory. That's at December 31st, so that's at the end. So I know that's going to be my ending number right here. My ending inventory for raw materials is $2,500. So I fill that in. Then I say, what's my next piece of information? Well, there's $2,000 materials on hand at the beginning of 2017. So that's how much material I had at the beginning of the year. So that's my beginning inventory. Then they tell me I had some purchases. Well, I purchased $375,000 materials. However, it only paid for $312,500. That's really kind of a red herring because you don't care whether it was paid for or whether it was bought on credit. What you care was, that's how much that you got. You got $375,000. So that's the number we're going to use. We can ignore this. The difference, this is what we paid cash for. The difference is what we must have bought on account. So we don't care about that. We just care that we had purchases of $375,000. Well, here's the nice thing about the T accounts. Once you plug in three numbers, you can find the missing fourth number. If I know these three, I can find that. If I knew these three up here, I could find that. If I knew that one and that one and that one, I could find the missing one in the middle. You just have to know how to take care of it. So I started with $200,000, so I'm going to add that in. I added $375,000, so that means that I had $377,000 worth of inventory available. I only had $2,500 worth of inventory at the end of the year, So the rest of it must have gone somewhere. And so if I subtract the ending inventory, that tells me that my amount of inventory that got transferred out was $374,500. And that got moved over to work in process. So if I look up here, that would be my correct answer. So by using the T accounts to organize the information, it makes it a little easier to figure out what's going on. Okay. Let's do another one. The next one asks us to, what are we looking at here? We're looking at how much is cost of goods sold for the year. So now I'm over at this end. I don't have to do all the pieces. I may only be looking for something that affects one or two of these. So I'm looking for this number here, cost of goods sold. So let's erase these numbers. They're not going to be applicable. Let's just get them out of there so they don't mess up anything. And so let's go through and fill in the pieces that we have here. So cost of goods manufactured equals $85,000. Well, I know if you've been looking at the videos for chapter 15 and 16 where we walk through the T accounts in detail, you'll know that the cost of goods manufactured is going to be the number that is moved out of inventory once it's finished into finished goods. So this is my $85,000 cost of goods manufactured. And that gets credited out of work in process and moved into finished goods. So there's my $85,000 as an increase, because now it's available for sale. It tells me that finished goods inventory is $2,000 at the beginning of the year. So I had $2,000 worth of materials that were in my warehouse at the beginning of the year. I transferred in another $85,000 worth of work that was finished. And then it tells me at the end of the period that my ending inventory, I only had $5,500 in my finished goods. Okay. Now to give me a couple of other pieces of information, they tell me beginning and ending work in process was $4,000 and $5,000. We can put those over here, $4,000 and $5,000. But the fact is, we're not going to do anything with them. We don't need those to find this number. We were already given this number. And since the numbers move from left to right, if we've got this number, we don't need to go backwards. So those are really just put in there to see if you know not to do anything with them. And sometimes these problems have extra information that you may not need. So what we do know is we have the three pieces here, so we're trying to find the amount that got sold, that was transferred out of finished goods. So again, we can add the beginning inventory. We have $85,000 worth of cost of goods sold, so to add it together on the cost of goods manufactured schedule, that would give us $87,000 of goods available for sale. We only had $5,000 in our ending inventory, so assuming our employees didn't steal them all, and we assume in our example we have honest employees, where did they go? Well, they must have been transferred out, and that works out to be $81,500. And where'd they go? Well, they got moved into our cost of goods sold. So our correct answer there would be $81,500. All right, let's make it a little bit more complex. Those are just looking at finding one number, usually maybe having two T accounts. Let's see what happens when we have more T. Oh my goodness. Let's see when we have more information. The more information you have, the more important it is to organize it so you don't get lost. So let's see if we can plug these numbers in and see where it takes us. So here, let's just start at the beginning and go through and organize what we got. Let's do, this is 17, this is 16, so this is beginning inventory, this is ending inventory. So let's put our beginning inventories in first. So we have raw materials, beginning inventory, $260,000. I don't know if I'm going to use all these, but I'm going to put them all in here just so I know that I don't have to worry about them. I can see them down here and don't keep referring to them up there. And then we had $150,000 for finished goods. And then it says my ending inventory, because this is the end of 17, was $310,000 in raw materials. This was $300,000 in work in process, and $190,000 in finished goods. By the way, what am I looking for? Oh, I'm trying to find total manufacturing cost. Okay, I know that's going to be part of my work in process. So I'm looking for a number in here when I'm done. So it says during 2017, $8,000 of raw materials were purchased. Okay, it doesn't say it was used, that's what was purchased. So I'm going to put that over here for my purchases, $800,000, because when it's purchased, materials comes into raw materials inventory until it's used. Direct labor cost amounted to $670. Well, my direct labor costs get recorded directly to my work in process, so I'm going to put DL, direct labor, 670, and that's going to be debited there to show that went in. And my manufacturing overhead incurred, or how much I spent, was $640. Now, my manufacturing costs are going to be my direct materials, my direct labor, and my manufacturing overhead that I've spent during the period. So I need to come in here and I need to find what my direct materials number is. And then all of these added together is going to give me my answer. So, but I don't know my direct materials because the 800,000, if you just read this, you might think, well, that's what goes in here. But it's not. That wasn't used. That was purchased. So now I've got to go through and find the amount that was used and transfer it into, find this number. So I go back like I did in the earlier example. I add my beginning balance of raw materials. I add what I purchased in. That gave me $1,060,000 available. I subtract my ending balance, what I didn't use, so the difference must have been what I used up, and that works out to be $750,000 of materials that were used and transferred out of my work in process, or my raw materials inventory. Where did they go? Well, when they were used, they went into into work in process. So this becomes $750,000. So now I've found my number here. These three numbers together equal my total manufacturing cost. Because my total manufacturing cost is the amount that I spent during the period. And if I add those three up, that gives me, what does that give me? $2,060,000. And I would look over here and I say, well, then that would be this answer right here. Now, one thing you got to keep in mind, people get this confused all the time. These three numbers added together are what we spent in this period. Those are my total manufacturing costs. My cost of goods manufactured is what I finished and transferred out. So don't confuse total manufacturing cost with cost of goods manufactured. They're two different numbers. Cost of goods manufactured includes the total manufacturing cost, but also has the beginning and ending work in process inventory factored in. Total manufacturing cost is just the cost in the period. Okay? The next one we have, I think it's a continuation of this one. Yeah, it's this one here. It's the same information, so all this is the same up here. The difference is they're asking us to find the cost of goods manufactured, what we had right here. But now what they're saying is, hey, oh no, I'm sorry. They're asking us to find the cost of goods sold. They want us to find this number. But just to make sure if you were doing these back to back, you made a mistake on the first one and you would do this one wrong because you'd have the wrong number here. They said, let's assume that our cost of goods manufactured was $1,890,000. So now we can fill this number in, $1,890,000, cost of goods manufactured. And by doing that, we basically don't need any of this stuff, right? Because we're saying that doesn't count anymore because that's behind us. Now we know going forward, this is what we're going to carry over here to our finished goods, $1,890,000. So again, if I want to know what got transferred out, what this number should be to move over, well, I'm going to say I started with $150,000 worth of materials in our warehouse. I worked on and finished $1,890,000 worth of new materials that were finished and transferred out. And in my warehouse at the end of the period, I only had 190. So if I had those two added together was what I had available, and there's only 190 left, the difference must have been how much got transferred out. And that would need to be a credit of $1,850,000. And that's what comes over here to my cost of goods sold. So I look over here and I see, oh yeah, here's my cost of goods sold, $1,850,000. So sometimes by doing this, it lets you know that you can ignore a lot of the information because sometimes you have too much information to do the calculations. And if you try to use all the numbers, you just trip over yourself or end up with the wrong number. Okay? Let's do one more. This one is, oh, this has all kinds of stuff. Let's clean these up here and walk through this one. If you're going through the chapter as well and you're looking at all the journal entries that they're doing in there, I got to be honest, journal entries, if I had to keep this straight by looking at the debits and credits, the examples I have in the book, it would confuse me. Because I can't memorize that many journal entries. If I have 4 or 5 or 6 journal entries in a row, I can't visually see how they're going from one inventory account to the next inventory account. So visually, this makes it easier for me to see that. You could post the journal entries if it has a debit for raw materials inventory and a credit for work in process. Sorry, it'd be the other way. If you'd have a credit for raw materials inventory and a debit for work in process inventory, you would just write those in. So all those journal entries they have in the book, you can walk through and show these as an example. Okay? The same thing if you're looking at the cost of goods manufactured. I know I said this in the Chapter 15 video, but you could take this, the cost of goods manufactured is basically where the cost flow here is going from left to right. If you tip this up and start at the top and go down, we have the cost of goods manufactured schedule, because we start with our work in process beginning at the very top, but then we do our raw materials inventory, then we do our finished goods inventory. That gives us a cost of goods manufactured, and then these last two pieces go over into the cost of goods sold section of the income statement. So this can also be used to do the cost of goods manufactured calculation to help you remember what order things go. Or if you don't want to do T accounts, you don't have to do T accounts. You can just remember the order of the cost of goods manufactured, and you can find all these numbers using that format in your mind as well, or writing it out as well. So the last one we have here, what do we got? Oh my goodness. Can't read that top line. Gulick Company has developed the following data for the current year. So we begin with our what we know, fill in the pieces. So beginning work in process is 240,000. Direct materials used, so that's the stuff that came from over here. 144. Materials used. So that's going to come over here and be direct materials into work in process, because that's where it was used. Actual overhead and applied overhead. They throw that at you a little bit to confuse you. In chapter 16 we talk about applied versus, well actually we do that in 15, applied versus actual. What we put into the work in process inventory account is the applied overhead. So we want to use the applied overhead. So manufacturing overhead is going to be the 216,000. Cost of goods manufactured, they give that to us. This is on this side, so cost of goods manufactured, because once they're manufactured, they're transferred out of work in process with a credit and moved into finished goods inventory with a debit to the journal entry. So that number is 264,000. What else do we have here? And total manufacturing cost, okay, that's going to be the direct labor, okay. What are we trying to find here? We're trying to find the ending work in process inventory. So we want to find this number, okay? So we want to start with our beginning inventory. We want to add our direct materials, our manufacturing overhead, and our direct labor, and then we want to subtract our cost of goods manufactured from that. But there's a problem. We don't know direct labor. They didn't give that to us. So how can we find this number if we're missing that number? Well, if you remember earlier, these three numbers right here, direct materials, manufacturing overhead, and direct labor, that's my total manufacturing cost. And guess what? They do give that to me. They tell me that's 720,000. So if I take direct materials and manufacturing overhead and subtract from 720, that's going to give me my direct labor number, which I wrote down here somewhere, which is 360,000. So I had to use this number and those two numbers to find that number. But that's just if I wanted to be kind of nice and neat. I really didn't need to, because I could have just ignored the direct materials and manufacturing overhead and then just put 720 in there. So you could have done it either way. So I did an extra step just to tie it together, but all three of these equal 720, okay? So if I add the 720 of these all equal and the 240, that tells me what my work in process was that was available during the period. How much did I transfer out? I transferred out 264,000, so what I had available I subtract what I got transferred out. What didn't get transferred out must be what's left at the end of the year, and that's $696,000. Again, 240 plus these three, subtract the cost of goods manufactured, 696, and if I come over here, that's the number that I have. So again, if you want to use the T accounts, hopefully this will show you a little bit more how you might use them to organize all these massive word problems that are there. If you don't want to use the T accounts, that's fine. These are multiple choice questions, and like I said, you can figure them out by just memorizing how these numbers all interact, writing out on the side the cost of goods manufactured and filling in the numbers, adding them up and down based upon that format. There's different ways you can do it, but for me, this is the easiest way, so it's there if you like it, and if you don't, you can just ignore it and don't worry about it. So hopefully that was helpful.